welcome to the class. It's going to be our last class today for the session or for the course that you started. So finally, it's ending today.
Right.
And then we look forward to Christmas and the New Year and everything else. So,
Yes, sir. Light coming up.
yeah. You've done really well. I see that you passed 2 of the exams. You've got only 2 left. So
Right.
the other 2 that are left out, I'm going to have to check in the morning to see where they are with the exams to give to you.
Okay.
I'll let you know tomorrow.
Okay. Sooner the
And,
better.
yeah, of course, I know you are all pumped up and ready and probably want to get done before Christmas.
I would like to.
Yeah, well, I'm going to try my best to make sure that you get your exams.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm just going to wait for Aaron and Nicole.
Okay. I want to thank you for the classes. I got some good information from them, and I hope to put all this in action pretty soon.
Sure, and most welcome. It was a pleasure, and I am particularly very happy that you have spent so much of your time and have attended all the classes, and you've been very attentive. So all that effort that you've put in, I will do my best to make sure that you get through the exam as well. So I'm available as much as I can to assist you in getting through with all these. Even though you did quite a bit already, you may not need my assistance, but if you do, then I'm available. We'll
Okay.
just wait. We'll just wait for Aaron and Nicole because it is our last class. I just want to make sure everybody is included in
Okay,
this
sure.
lecture today. Thank you. Let's get started. Today we see this is an additional class which I'm taking is just to finish up whatever was left out. So one of the things that we did not touch upon at all was the um, internet ethics, and then there were few topics that we couldn't finish in business internet research. And while we were doing module 2, we did cover quite a bit, but I think we couldn't finish up the surveys of how you prepare your questionnaires and your surveys. And then the third thing which I found out was that there were certain parts of the technology or certain topics which we did not cover as extensively, or you could say that we touched upon it, but we couldn't do all the slides. So given the fact that this is our last class and we have to make our best judgment to see what is really important and what I would feel that I need to cover for the class, not cover up in that sense, but for me to finish all of them may not be possible, but I'll make sure that some of the important areas are covered. Since we were talking about internet ethics, let's try to see what internet ethics are about and what you mean by it, the conceptual understanding, and there is plenty for you to read through in the book. So anything that has got long description and has long paras and definitions and things of that nature, you may want to spend some time on your own. But let's just get an understanding of what this topic is about. What is internet ethics? So besides and beyond the definition part, I'm going to just explain what I think internet ethics are, and I'll ask few questions and share your opinions as well, just to get an understanding or get an overview of what ethics means in the internet world. And then we'll do some other components that I feel that we should finish up in business of research. There were a few things I'd explain to you. So let's start with what we mean by business. Well, let's not call it business. Let's just talk about generally what internet ethics is actually. So I guess internet ethics is subjective. It depends on the morality of people, the society, what the society dictates, what certain laws are playing a part in the ethics and ethical issues. Ethics is just moral obligations and something which the society comes as private, anonymous, or gives you right as an individual to safeguard your information, as well as how much of it can be delivered as information or shared as information on the internet so that it does not jeopardize your rights as an individual, as a human being. So it is actually revolving around the human subject in that sense. And then the society itself, depending on what are the level of ethics that are supposed to be floating around in the internet world or the virtual world, we will see how we tackle them on everyday basis. And something that we miss out or we don't pay attention to, and information that we are giving away without consent or without having enough knowledge. Then there comes the aspect of online research, collection of data and information, which is what really is the core of doing online research for the researcher. Research can be personal, research can be, for your client, or research could mean that you are in a profession where you feel that you need enough information to make decisions or allow for others in your organization to make those decisions. So when you are doing all that as a researcher, you are definitely going to come across the issues of ethics and ethical information within the boundaries of legal restraints or what the law does to protect the rights of individuals. So ethics cover how to live a good life. Of course, these are generic terms. If we go through each one of them, you would notice that it is subjective and it is a level of responsibility that the internet or the I guess the overall wisdom of the internet dictates for the reason of protecting rights of individuals. So this is where everything will circle around. The language of right and wrong. So again, what is right, what is wrong? It is subjective. It is sometimes a matter of personal opinions. Moral decisions, what is good and bad. You would consider moral decisions as a decisions that you would make as someone who, again, I'm just going to look at it from the researcher's perspective. We are not going to tackle it from any other angle because it is a huge area. So moral decisions for a researcher of what is good and bad for the subject, of what you feel would prevent you as a researcher from getting into any liability lawsuits. Then there is a moral aspect of it where you are making a selection in not only for the source where you're obtaining the information, but if any of those pieces of information are tied up to the individuals or certain type or nature of records, then to collect them and to use them for commercial reasons or for whatever reasons, you need to be within the norms of what the society would allow and what the law would allow. So what is good and bad means all that I just explained to you as a moral obligation for a researcher to be aware of the two elements, which is what the society dictates, what the laws are going to what type of laws are going to play the part, like anonymity or certain sensitive information. And then comes the decision, which is your own, and how you're going to use that information. Are you going to use it as something which has to do with exposing or using that information for personal gains or for the general good of the society? Or have you taken the consent from whoever you are collecting the information from? Have you made sure that the source is above the age of, or adult at least? It's not coming from anyone underage, and that you are not biased about gender. You are not collecting your samples or your population, which shows a bit of a bias in terms of the volume of consent for certain type of questions, which can be which are applied differently for women and for men, where the opinions would matter. So all that, there's a lot of information that needs to be vetted and be looked at from your own moral perspective as well. Um, it says, this says it all, this statement that says the concepts of ethics have been derived from religions, philosophies, cultures. They infuse debates on topics like abortion, human rights, and professional conduct. Where the professional conduct comes in, it is applied through regulators and agencies and certain laws and rules which are generally accepted for good governance, and therefore that becomes another subject. But those subjects are purely to do with the quality of professionalism or to maintain certain standards and so on. So that professional conduct, or the part where the ethics are applied in a professional way by organizations, by agencies, even from um, organizations like the association itself, which is claiming to have somewhat regulations or a framework created to deliver the ethical and professional information by staying within the ethics of applying those rules, or where we are using it for the reason of maintaining the decorum, or you could say the I would say the professional conduct is the right word. So generally it is the professional conduct which is regulated, but besides this part, we are more concerned about human rights, abortions, privacies, anonymity, and so on. So what we are going to look at. Let's look at another topic which I found on our websites. Um, some of these good articles are there because the information that you will be coming across in the book may not be as new, or could be something which is leaving out some major issues which are upcoming issues, or the ones that are identified under the ethical issues are actually given here, or they are referred to in the articles we have. So if I just click on articles here in the knowledge network, you would see that, yeah, here it is. Gosh, here is the articles. Oh, I have to log in first. I don't know if any one of you are members as well. If you are, then you are given access to these articles that you can search for. Let's suppose you have access to it. And if you go in knowledge network and click on articles, you would find a search tab at the top. If you put the word like ethics here and click on it, there's several articles that are listed. The most important one, or the one that I feel is really good for you to know, to gain the knowledge or the latest info on what is the upcoming ethical issues, or something which is now part of social media, or something which we did not consider in the book, is listed here, and it is very interesting. They are talking about mass surveillance, again, anonymity, privacy, privileges taken away, um, deep fakes, which means a person or a personality as a subject can be altered or be placed with, you know, designing some fake news or fake videos and images and so on. Disinformation is another kind of ethical issue where uh, there are no ethics when it comes to discrimination, when it comes to having a bias. It is so personal that unless there are laws and something that defines it as a strict rule, it is very difficult to leave it for moral obligations or your own personal opinion to make that decision for you. Then we have addictive users experience and so on. So we have these pointed out in this article, which I find very interesting. But best thing for you to look for it if you don't have access to our articles as a member, then I'll give you the headline or a heading that you can search for. Just leave it in the chat. This seems to be a good article. I'll just share it with you. But here we are just doing an overview of what ethics is about and what are the latest issues in the zone of internet ethics. So let me see, where is the, here it is. I'm just going to give you the link. Where is it? Maybe I need to minimize this. Here it is. 5 most important ethical issues facing the technology. Now, let's move on. And approaches to ethics. These are just terminologies. It does not change anything. The core of the ethics remain the same. It is just methodology, or you could say the approaches. So there are 3 different approaches. Meta ethics deals with nature of moral judgment. It looks at the origins and meanings of ethical principle. Normative ethics is concerned with moral judgment criteria between what is wrong and what is right. Applied ethics, controversial topics like war, animal rights, and capital punishment. So these are basically part of, I guess, more to do with social science and more generic. It's just hashing out different approaches to different types of issues in the ethics, or you could say that these are just the names or the terms that you may want to remember with reference to what it means. Normative is what is right or wrong. Meta ethics goes deeper. It is more philosophical. So it is to do with writing something or doing some writing some critical analysis, writing a paper on ethics and ethical principles. Applied ethics is more to do with other issues, environment, animal rights, and so on. Definitions of internet research as ethics, not as important. Now, as researchers, it is going to point to, this is like 8 different points that we will consider as important when we are doing inquiry as researchers online on the internet in reference to collection of data and the content pages that we feel that we need to collect that information from. It will include some studies. Anyway, utilize this is collection of data or information through online interviews, surveys. So this is the important part. And with reference to ethics, we will see if we can touch upon the type of questionnaires that you build or when you do online surveys. This is where the question of ethics is going to come into play. And as a researcher, you have to have certain type of disclaimers, certain permissions that you have to take before you do that survey. In the selection of your subject has to be aware of what the motive or what the intention of your of that survey is before they actually apply or give answers to the questions that are there. So this is one area. Then study how people use and access the internet through collecting and observing. So these are referred to as trend, or the collection of patterns or the information which has relevance with respect to the environment, with respect to the other elements like the seasonal requirements. Like if you are relating it to a certain set of information which is applied inside of a test environment, or an environment which you feel that you have to mention as something that you can that you can compare and create that data which is comparable year after year. So if it is something that has to do with the trend used for certain keywords in a certain season, if it is election season, these were the wordings used. Use that information as a reference that builds some sort of analysis or helps in working out some analysis. So how people use and access the internet is not purely an issue of ethics, but collection of the information, or the source where you collect the information and the way you collect the information is the issue of ethical concerns, or this is where we will apply the uh, normal ethics or expectations of how you're going to collect that information. Activities of participants on social network sites, lists, servers, websites, blog, games, virtual world, or others. It's just a responsible reporting, and something to do with social experiments, like the videos that you see where you sometimes use actual actors. On the other hand, you actually use real subjects who are not aware of being recorded. So there are some ethical issues involved there, where you don't want to capture videos or images or photograph someone without their consent. So what is the right timing to obtain that permission? Because social experimentation means that the awareness of your behavior or someone's behavior is recorded without interrupting or without letting them know, so that you can see what the reaction is. So you collect that information after that social experiment finishes, and that means that you're going to approach the subject and let them know why you have reported them, and so on. So and then you have to get another consent that allows you to use them in that video or that experiment, and so on. um, Websites, blogs, games, and things of that nature. What do you think would be the moral issues or issues of concern as far as ethics with the video games people are playing these days? In my opinion, it is the extent of violence. It is the psychological aspect of how it impacts the behavior of individuals in different age groups, and so on. So there comes a responsibility. Whoever the vendors or manufacturers of those video games are, they have certain level of moral responsibility. So even though these words are mentioning generally what is be considered as part of the um, part of concerns, or the information that flows through these mediums in different ways, but we are not going to go in detail. Websites is too generic, blogs is responsible reporting, confirm reporting. It also involves certain laws which actually are to do with copyrights infringement, or producing original material versus building something or deriving some inferences from somewhere else, whose reports or whose articles you have reviewed and made an opinion of your own, and you've represented or presented it in blogs, and so on. So you have to really be able to make sure that that information is not something which is not exactly your original idea, or you are using biased information or opinions which are unverified and so on. Then studies, then we've got utilization or engaging in data processing, analysis, or storage of data sets, data bank, and repositories. So um, where do the in this type of situation, what could be the ethical issues involved in data collection or data sets or data bank? It is, I guess, you could say that again the principles are the same. The consent is important. The type of data you're collecting and presenting for others should be socially acceptable, as the information which does not have a moral binding for presentation, like personal information, personal data sets of individuals, or something to do which is morally not acceptable in the society, and so on. Studies, softwares, code, and so on. So it just goes on and on. You have to use your imagination to see where the impact of ethics in research would apply in all these conditions. Employees, employment, or employment companies, recruiters are under a strict, um, you could say, binding for collecting information on individuals, not just what is there on the resume, but there are different stages or different areas within recruitment that needs to have consent, or that needs or requires for them to be very careful about the type of data they collect. Like for instance, making a distinction between between male and female. Gender discrimination should not be there, so they have to devise or they have to implement certain type of opportunities that does not conflict with the information or bias, or does not conflict with the bias to do with gender or gender recognition, as well as even using their names with the suffixes like Mr., Mrs. There are people who wouldn't really prefer for anyone to write even what gender they are. If someone writes something like MZ, it's for Ms. now, which means you're not a female or you're not a male. So you're kind of in between, and then your sexual orientation and so on. So employers and employees are obviously obligated when it comes to hiring people directly, in the same way as the recruiters are, and so on. Then we've got studies, large scale production use regulation, never mind these corporations and all that. But generally it is, I'm just explaining the idea of where the ethics or how the ethics would apply in different situations for information collection reasons. Key guiding principles for ethics and greater the vulnerability. So these are just rules or just common definition of how the court or the law will treat certain issues if the fundamentals are to be compared or to be evaluated, so that they connect with the ethics or lawsuits or anything that an individual would file for the reason of employment or for whatever reason, you know. But these are the triggers and these are the differentiations that one has to look at. Even as a researcher, for collecting the information, you don't want something to come on you as a liability. So what is important for the court is the vulnerability of a community author participant, which means that whoever is the aggrieved party has to know that wherever they have actually gone against the ethical principles or the moral obligation that the court expect, or the minimum moral obligation that is expected of a business against the individual who they're interacting with, either as an employment situation or even as a vendor or someone there connected with the business, has to be evaluated for the vulnerability. Vulnerability means that if the position of the opponent or someone that is filing the lawsuit, is more vulnerable because of certain reasons, like they can't afford the the attorney, they cannot afford to spend time in the court, or they are like far away, so the jurisdiction could be a handicap, or their age could be a handicap, their background, professional background, and so on. So there could be a decision made in situations where the vulnerability is favored on the other side, because harm is defined as contextually, ethically, principle are more likely to be understood inductively rather than applied universally. So it depends on the condition and the situation and the subject, who is more vulnerable or less vulnerable. So it is, I guess, it is subjective. Um, and because digital information at some point involves individual person, consideration of principle related to research on human subject may be necessary. Human subject and ethics is another area where the research is ongoing, and with the evolution of how the social media is using certain pieces of information and how that information is being connected and used for various reasons. um, when it is used for various reasons, I guess the important thing to consider is how the subject of ethical importance in the technology world, and especially information sharing on a free internet, is affecting certain laws and regulations that are, like I said, is still evolving, and more articles are there is a lot of issues within the web also. So we'll just tackle them one at a time, and that is besides the social part or the social impact of how the society looks at things, which is to do more with the technical issues of privacy, anonymity, and the information that is voluntarily or involuntarily collected in the internet. Um, okay, so let's just carry on. Everything else, I don't give a lot of weightage as far as what is going to come in the exam and for you to learn. If you have the conceptual clarity of what is involved in ethics, or what it means when we say ethics in technology, that should cover our subject for today. So let me just look at the technology part, where the technical issues, key ethical issues in internet research. So let's just cover this A, B, C, D until F to get a general understanding of how the ethics or ethical issues would play under these headings. This is all we have to be concerned about. Rest of it, anything beyond this, is probably not as important. It's just a matter of interest and the time you have in hand to read through those. For me, mm, these issues that I'm referring to now, A through F, is important. Understanding human subject research, public and private information. What is public? What is private spaces? What is the meaning of informed consent? Privacy, anonymity, confidentiality, and revealing identities. Issues in recruitment, copyrights, ebooks, contracts, and disclaimers. So this is what we are going to learn. So understanding human subject research. Um, let's look at the two aspects in which we collect the information on individuals. One is the data through intervention or interaction with the individual. Here they are talking purely about the information you collect through consent or via some known means and ways of informing the other party as individuals to understand what the survey is about, where the information is being used, and then to get an informed consent from them. And there is a legal of you could say that there is a legal writing involved in this, and there is a standard format that that is applied. If you're in North America, particularly in USA and Canada, it is more or less understood in the same way, same meaning, and the laws are somewhat similar. So the informed consent is a very simple letter. It's not too confusing. It's not very lengthy, but at least it identifies why the information is being collected, who is going to use this information, and whether or not the other party would have any objection to using certain attributes like their gender information or their other sensitive information, which they have to actually explicitly consent to on a piece of paper or through some electronic means or through electronic contracts. Second is identifiable private information, which means their medical records, clinical information, could be to do with their financials, mortgages, and things of that nature. But then this means that this is considered legally a private information. When we use the word private information in ethics, private only is identified with those type of information which the law considers private. It is not a matter of moral judgment or for someone who's collecting the information as researcher to identify something being private or non-private. So that awareness of understanding the law that prevents and actually holds that piece of information as being private enough that someone can sue you for it. That is what we will define as private information. Then what is private and what is public information? One has to understand that when you get deeper into collecting some public information and you think you are entitled to reuse it or use it for reporting on or in whichever manner you want to use it, will not depend on the fact that you just paid for it and therefore you own it and therefore you can use it as you want. Anytime that you get access to some sort of subscriptions or subscription databases that allows you access to that piece of information, there is a caveat or a terms and conditions of use which one must read carefully. At least if I'm using, let's say, LexisNexis to collect information about a company, a private company, I would have to read those terms and conditions as to how I can use that information. And that is enough for someone to understand what they can reuse or how they can distribute that information or how that information can be shared with the third party or your client. Simply having access to the information on web does not mean that the individual who have created it or used it perceive the material. See, it is talking about it. Let's see what is within ports. It says, for example, a website of an organization such as BBC could be considered as public space. Individuals posting to BBC message boards, like comments, like opinions, although understanding that their post can be publicly viewed, may not be happy for material posted by them to be used or quoted in pieces of research, just as a group of people conversing. Now, this is considered a public space, not because that information is freely available for the public, but the way that you are going to use it. For example, if it is a trend analysis in Facebook, and Facebook is using the behavior of users or using that information in a way that it is sort of being collected from from the individuals who are members of Facebook, but that information may be private. Still, the Facebook has the authority under the terms and conditions to be able to use that sort of collection of trends, use of certain type of information for the reason of figuring out the trends and behaviors and so on internally by Facebook for marketing reasons or for whatever reasons it may be. That has to be consented first. That means even the platform which may be public or that could be part of the public, that user has not made it a private information. consciously making that selection. Still, the Facebook may not have all the rights to use it in whichever way it wants. For example, it cannot share that information with any of its subsidiaries, other companies, third parties, or even for itself to gain marketing edge, let's say. So whenever we look at a public space and we think that information we can use simply because it is out there may not be as publicly or cannot be utilized based on certain type of restrictions for privacy and public information. So public information means that it is how you use it is what matters, and where the ethics and ethical issues come into play. And your moral obligations and anything that is not dictated by law is not a consideration. Rather, it is the law itself which will prevail in such situations. Um, Informed consent and ethics. Informed consent means that whoever you are, using as a subject for collection of information has to give you a consent. Like I said, informed consent means that the subject is aware of where that information is going, purpose of that information, and explicit consent that says that such information can be used in certain ways. And that means that informed consent is from the subject's point of view. Subject is a human subject. We're talking about some subject's point of view is what the subject is consenting, and from the point of view of whoever is conducting the research or doing the surveys online has a moral obligation, and not any other obligation that would mean that the way you're going to it's not going to restrict, in other words, the way you're going to design your questionnaire. But if it is an entrapment, or the question is posed in such a way that it gives a type of information or reveals certain information because the other subject may not be aware or may not realize that they are actually giving away some information which may be of sensitive nature, or otherwise they would get confused in understanding exactly you know where that information is to be used, or they're giving away their private information because the questions are worded differently. That could also cause some sort of concern and be the cause of liability within the um, norms of how the law would look at it. Purpose of the research has to be there is a format. If you just Google and say that I need a form, or just write form that says form informed, let's say, what is the word to be used? I think informed consent. Just put sample and then informed consent. You will get a lot of forms. A format will be there that gives you an idea of what is covered in that informed consent form that you are giving to the other party. So what is mentioned in that form usually is the purpose of research, methods that is being used for collection, possible outcome of the research, associated risks or harms that the participant might face. Besides this, there are other elements also which I don't see here for some reason, but let's suppose these four are the major elements. However, one more thing that is missing that I would think is be there is how that information would affect the outcome of research. It says possible outcome of the research. Yeah. So this is the main area, because this is there, but let's say that this is the most important thing after purpose of research. The possible outcome of the research means that if the research is being used, where it will be used, and how it would impact, or the result would impact decision of some sort. So that needs to be understood, and this is where the paras are longer and explains more about the consequences of this research. Obtaining consent in traditional research usually involves person-to-person verbal communication with the participant in research project. These days, consent is also collected by voice. So there is a voice intelligence software that we use when we are doing some sort of surveys, or say something that involves informed consent. A lot of times you send it to the other party and you don't have a lot of time. The other party didn't have time, they didn't sign it. So you never got that, or for some reason it got lost between, the communication, or that the document is missing for some reason, then it becomes a problem. So a lot of times we use a software which is a third party again, that records the voice, and through which we also get the opportunity to match the voice in case if it needs to be verified as a conversation between an individual X, for instance. So the individual X voice is compared by the software automatically for verification reasons as well in future when it needs to be verified. Uh, and we do that. And all the user has to say is, yes, I agree, or yes, I consent to it. There are a few wordings we use that sort of replaces the exchange of documents. um, However, consider, so anyway, let's just some practical challenges. Difficult to obtain. Yes, obtaining can affect the quality of data, and all these are not as relevant. But I explained to you that there is a digital way of getting that consent communicated and recorded, and eventually can work as a piece of information or as a recording that can be verified at later date as well. Uh, Use of consent cards or tokens, use of electronic signatures, all these are there. Consent and minors, you understand that certain type of regulations are there, but that makes sure that that sort of consent for the type of information that is revealed or shared, or that information which is collected is not coming mm, uh, from an individual who is a minor. Minor age is different for different countries. It is 18th in Canada, probably the same but for certain type of regulation, this could go as high as 21. So it just depends on the type of situation, the type of information, sensitivity of the information, and so on. Consent of minor is important. A lot of times it is very difficult to make that distinction if someone on the other side is a minor, because you don't have a visual and you cannot verify any birth certificates. So in that situation, it becomes very difficult and tricky. All you could do is just leave a disclaimer or something that explains the privacy privileges and the privacy that applies to adults only, and the individual has to just say, yes, I agree, or I'm consenting as an adult, or so all those little buttons that appear, and just clicking on them would sort of give that assurance for research purposes that the age is confirmed. But it is very difficult really to do that. However, um, there are ways around it also, but normally the subjects of interest for research that involved children is, let's suppose if it is to do with the type of mm, with the type of product that is specifically made for the children, then you have to get their opinion and not that of adults. For example, the users of some video games are under 13 years of age. Then there is a lot of you know sort of ways in which you're going to obtain that consent. You of course obtain it through their guardians or their parents or whoever are supervising those children. Their consent has to be there. And other thing is that the adult has to be present in certain type of information for the minors to actually answer those questions. A lot of times you do focus group or virtual focus groups where you are there in the room through video, but you have to have somebody else, a third person, who is supervising or around those children to do that. So then comes these are some of the detailed areas which obviously are part of the ways in which the ethics are of concern, and ethics is what dictates these laws to be applied. And therefore we have to be aware of such situations as part of the ethical consent that needs to be obtained as well. um, Use of special software, multiple confirmation point, asking for age later, depending on the type of, these are all old ways these days. There are softwares and there are ways in which third party platforms have emerged that are exclusively there as a middle party or somewhat agencies that actually make all the arrangements and take care of how you do your online investigations and research where the children are involved. Privacy, anonymity, confidentiality, and revealing identities. So obviously we've dealt with, how the Chrome browser or any browser that we're using is collecting our information, understanding what those terms and conditions are and how you are able to change those adjustments on. I'm just using browser as an example here. You can you can do your adjustments. It gives you the opportunity under the law to make an informed decision on whether or not certain areas that you would be searching, you don't want those to be known or for information to be collected, for example short term and long term history and so on. So it is a matter of learning on the product or the medium that you're using. What are some of the implied obligations or terms and conditions that are there, which you feel that would be something that would not want you to use that product at all. So you can choose not to use Google browser. You could choose another browser, similar browser like DuckDuckGo, for example, that has a better anonymity policy for you, and so on. Revealing identities, confidentialities. Just remember the fact that you're using a third-party platform which is free for you, something for which you don't pay anything. In situations like this, mostly you have to go with the default or the standard terms and conditions, which obviously the other party is not going to change. And for you, it is a matter of decision whether or not you want to go ahead and use it as a free service. Eventually, they might just charge you for it, and you may lose your records and everything else. So you have to look at the risks involved versus the benefit of sharing your information and so on. So these are some of the general issues of ethics that we have to be concerned about. Now I'm going to return ethical issues in recruitment. I don't think I have to go through this, but respect for privacy, vulnerable subjects, cultural consideration, all that we have discussed in general, and we know how it would apply and affect the recruiters in a way that they have to be aware of what could conflict with the ethics of collection of information, and what type of information needs informed consent from the potential candidates or potential employees. So this part is just going to revise. It's a revision of what we've covered already. So this page where chapter 4.10, this is the last chapter in the subject that we are covering on internet ethics. So we're going to conclude this part right now, take a break and come back. When I return, I'm going to cover all those little segments that we missed out, and I hope you can connect with where we left and sort of use your notes or something that gives you a better connectivity, or sort of gives you or refreshes your mind where we left, and be able to understand where we are taking the topics from there on, hopefully. I know that you have gone through or you have recording of the webinar we had on business of research. Assuming that you may have referred to it later or as well, or maybe you remember that what we discussed, something that we weren't able to finish is what I will be finishing up through some of these slides that are left out, because I'm obligated to finish them, and I also feel they are important for you. So we'll continue with this part. Where is it? Business of research. We'll continue with certain slides on these parts, and I'm sure you'll be able to connect with it and make a relationship. So let's just come back in 5 minutes. I'll continue from here, do business of research, and then we will look at the questionnaires and surveys. The slides that had a chart, if you remember. Where is that chart? I'll bring it up after we return from the break. You would know where we are connecting, and it's been recent when we were doing the internet law. No, I'm sorry. We were doing the, what was it? We were doing, let me check. I'm just going to leave that slide open for you in 5 minutes that you have. Maybe you can look at them. This was, we had covered sampling, qualitative, quantitative data types. I wanted to finish up surveys and see if I have this slide here somewhere. It'll just jog your memory and allow you to see where we are connecting with it. I can find it readily, fine. Otherwise, I'll come back and or during the break, I'll look for it. I think it's in the other PowerPoint. So anyway, I'm just going to return in a few minutes then. Let's just take a break right now. If you have any questions, by the way, on ethics or something that is intriguing your mind on this subject of internet ethics, please, you can ask me, or you could just put it in the chat box, and I'll be happy to answer that before we start with other. And even a question for the business of research. People usually, or my students usually have lots of questions on this area because they're planning to start their own business of research. So, you know, they look at it from all different angles, and with the type of information they need on where to start with the business or. Yes. Okay. I'm back and we can get started, finish up. I will try to finish it quickly. In case we run over time, it won't be more than 10 minutes after. So let's just get started with a slide that I'd share with you first. And let's look at, there are two types of collection of information through surveys and through polls. So polls are different from surveys, and there's a distinction between them. There could be a question in the exam that says, you know, identify if these are the attributes or something that is related to polls or to surveys. So the distinction needs to be clear. In surveys, we are going to look at the question types. And then we are going to look at survey types. Polls are pretty much limited. They're very precise and not much to work on or to learn from what is involved in polls. But surveys is what is really important because it is more extensive, and the questions needs to be crafted in a certain way. So let's look at the type of questions. We have two types. One is open-ended, the other one is close-ended. We learn what is open-ended question. It gives more flexibility and gives a lot of room for the researcher to come up with some sort of conclusions, or the objective research. If it is more complex, then you use open-ended questions, and we will see some examples to get an understanding what open-ended is. Close-ended, it's similar to polls, except that in close-ended you have more questions, and those questions are yes or no, or something that is more on the definitive side. Those are close-ended questions. And within the open-ended, we look at all these different types and learn the terminology, or at least know what each of these wordings mean for the type of questions. And then survey types would be longitudinal, cross-sectional, close-ended, and so on. So we'll see whatever we can cover. I'm more focused on this part, and this is what I'd like to discuss more. So let's go to the book again. So the difference between surveys and polls is that surveys are preempted in risk assessment, business intelligence gathering, comparative analysis, market research, and social research. This also means that there is more flexibility in survey questions, and more elaborate pieces of information can be collected as a sequence of questions that somewhat back up the question that is asked previously. So it sort of nudges or moves the questions, or moves the information collection in a certain direction. The online surveys are broadly categorized in two types: instrumentation and according to period involved. This is not as important, because when you look at the questions, you would know that it is driving your objective very easily, and you don't sit and make these distinctions, and it is not as important. So let's just look at the difference between surveys and polls. Both online surveys and polls use questionnaires and gather opinion from their targeted audience, yet there are some fundamental differences between the two types. And what are the differences? I think you can see it in the chart right here. And this chart is on the page 323. It is giving you the distinction, differentiation, several questions, one multiple choice question in polls, and in survey you have several questions that drive your research. It can gather opinions, can help you determine future action of the surveyor. You can ask respondent in survey for personal information if needed. Polls gather opinion on single topic. Usually these topics are definitive questions where anyone can participate. You don't have to select a special group, or you don't select your population as a sample. You usually leave it as anyone to attempt voluntarily or to answer it voluntarily. A lot of times researchers offer certain type of I guess you could say remunerations, or certain type of gifts if someone is answering polls. But normally that type of benefit is applied in surveys rather than in polls. In polls, normally you don't offer anything. It's just a matter of someone having the time or have an interest in the question. Usually the polls are answered by people who are very passionate about a topic or certain type of opinion that they think would matter eventually. So this is where the polls are important, and these are short. So polls are usually not too long. Surveys are the opposite of that, and take longer to answer. Requires more time to gather responses and analysis in needed. Result of polls can be seen in reports immediately. So here, you have something that is more detailed, if it is a survey versus the poll, which is short and pretty much is descriptive of the if, of the subject on which they are answering the question for. best method to apply. When surveys are best method, you need comprehensive feedback. You will be acting upon the results. You have several questions to ask and so on. So let's just look at the type of surveys or questionnaires. There is close-ended questions, close-ended in contrast with open-ended questions, which cannot be answered with a simple yes or no. So if it is simple yes or no, it is close-ended. If it is more elaborate and it is in piecemeals, or it has a sequence of questions which follow one another in a certain hierarchy, that is open-ended questions. So the close-ended, it's definitive, and open-ended is something that gives analysis like sentiment analysis and thoughts and trends and things like that. So first is dichotomous questions. Do you believe a clothing store should be? This is an example of close-ended questions. You could see that it says yes or no. Multiple choice questions are also close-ended, where it says, select one answer. Multiple choice questions. Rating questions is for sentiment analysis or analysis of behavior of some sort, or trend analysis. So this is how often do you purchase. So these are definitive. You could just say occasionally, or you could say rarely, but it's not something that is left open-ended for researcher to guess or to develop some sort of detailed analysis. It is short, and it has its own different namings, like rating questions. If someone asks you in the exam, can you define the way, they're just going to pose a question like this one and say, can you identify it with the type of questions? You would say that it is a rating question. This one you would say is a multiple choice question. Likert scale. If you agree, you don't agree. Economic situation is inability of legislation. So disagree, somewhat agree, and agree. So somewhat agree will later on. This is more of a quantitative data. Qualitative data. You have to quantify it later on and prepare some sort of basis in which you would be able to convert it into digits or numbers. And overall, do you think trade globalization is good for it? Disagree, agree, agree. So these are just some of the patterns in which you can pose the question. Semantic is weightage is given, like bad scale 1 to 7, unimportant scale 1 to 7, semantic differential scale. Ranking question, your first choice, your second choice, your third choice. So you would know that these are ranking questions. Checklist of type of questions, which would you like to see in the, so there could be a question for which you can answer more like a multiple choice, but it is made into a checklist. So checklist of items or components or anything which needs to be measured and identified. Fill in the blanks. So these are all open-ended. There's advantages and disadvantages of open-ended question. Don't have to worry about that. Then we have online interviews. I think we've covered this one. Computer mediated online interviews require different ethical consideration. Online interviews required different ethical consideration, sampling, and repo than found in traditional face-to-face interviews. So online interview, you have to have informed consent. This is where the ethical consideration is coming. Sampling has to be, non-biased, or it should be gender neutral. Repo is important, that the group you are selecting is selected by more than a few people. So if you are an individual doing research, they're going to say who's involved in selecting, making the selection of a sample. You sit with the client and usually come up with, a third-party opinion as to approval of the sampling. So if it is traditional face-to-face, it is a little bit different. But if it is online interviews, then these are the considerations. Using online interviews for collecting preferred when. So in what situations online interviews are considered important? Social cues of interviews are not valuable information source for interviewer. Like, depending, it is the nature of the research. Like sometimes we have questions, or the type of research that we have demands that we look at the behavior of a user, the conditions in which that interview is taken. That is really to do with the environment or the conditions that are applied for that sample, or when identifying a subject. So those are the social cues which are important. If it is important enough, then you do face-to-face. If it is not, then you do online interviews. Depending on the budget, also looking for access to people on site. Anonymity is requested where certain topics are sensitive and something that you feel that you are not only morally obligated, but legally you are constrained, where the topic is such that you don't want to reveal the information about a person or personality or anything that involves a human subject. That subject needs to be carefully, or you could say that the questionnaire for that type of interview have to be carefully built. um, and if it is some sort of information which later on, that when you pass it on or use it in your research, demands that you identify the subject, then you would pose your questions differently, so that um, you have some sort of clarity about about like certain issues are very personal. Like you don't want to expose the subject uh, for their personal opinions, and they would request the anonymity for it. But you can prepare your questionnaire in a manner that does not intrude in the you could say that in the privacy of a person, or the person does not think of it to be private enough, but it is more generic, general. So depending on how you pose your question will have a direct and indirect impact on the anonymity that the subject may choose or may not choose. So it's just, you spend a lot of time in building questionnaires in such situations, which has to be very carefully crafted so it does not appear as intrusive, or that kind of situation. So competent enough in typewriting and using Access, so that's irrelevant. Cross-sectional surveys usually utilize questionnaires to ask about particular topic at one point in time. For instance, there could be cross-sectional surveys that pose the type of questions which are time related or time sensitive, for the event that is happening, has happened, or it's an evolving story, or something which requires a time gap. So you do those services in different segments or at different timings. And it doesn't have to be the same people on, or it's the same subject that you are going to continue asking the questions. It just depends. It's more dependent on the event rather than an individual. So questions remain the same, but they change somewhat, just a little bit, to be applied in instances which involve the time or the time frame that is moving. That is what we call the cross-sectional. Longitudinal surveys are just the opposite of it. It is just a one-time survey that you do. Then you want to know how you prepared the sample question. You can select the sample as simple random sample, stratified random sample. You have learned this previously when we were doing our sampling. The important general idea of doing surveys involved these elements, which is perceptions. How satisfied were you with the level of service provided by the office of the registrar, as an example? So it is a perception which is subjective, which depends on the circumstances and situations and that the type of research you're doing. So perception is something which is subjective and it is more on the qualitative side. The behavior, how often do you visit the health and counseling center in a month? So I guess that is going to tie up to the frequencies, which is the quantitative data you're going to collect. That is, just these are some of the examples that you look at before you start building your questionnaire as the in which direction or what is the purpose of your research. Is it the behavior analysis, perception analysis, or is it an observation? Learning outcomes, what does this mean? After participating in this, are you able to articulate advantage and impact of diversity in society? So I guess this is what we can apply when we are finished with our session or with the course that we are doing. A survey that will come to you would be the learning outcomes. Was it satisfactory? Did you gain anything from it? Was it useful enough? And so on. Then we've got methods of surveys administration. Survey administration is actually dependent on begins with captive audience. Administrator can be available. I don't think that this is important. We don't have to worry about mobile surveys and all of this. Web surveys, we already know that we have to decide if it is going to satisfy your needs and fulfill the objectivity of your research. Ability to send mass notification of surveys, not necessarily a captive audience. So, depends. If it is a captive audience, what captive, when we use the word captive, it is important because we use it quite often. So when I'm preparing a survey, I would say that this is intended for captive audience, which means the sample we are selecting are involved in certain type of activities. And those individuals are actually able to answer, or they have the wisdom or the professional capacity to answer those questions. So that could be my captive audiences. Or if I don't want that, I want a general information from different segments of society or different segments or different departments of an organization, it will be a non-captive audience. Guide for improving response quality. So guide we are not going to discuss. This is not as relevant. Now, online virtual focus groups is important. Ethnography, it's anything that we use on the internet as piece of information that prepares the user for answering the questions. We are entering into an ethnography. Ethnography in the traditional research sense are the lot or the subject that are interested in studying culture, often engage in field work to immerse themselves in the culture. They are studying, so it has a lot to do with social sciences, which is, as I mentioned, social experiments, sentiment analysis, trend analysis, things that are of qualitative nature is virtual ethnography. And if that, we call it virtual if it is actually done on the internet in some way, or a social platform is used. Online clinical trials is another type of research, which is again has to do a lot with human subject, and it has a lot of moral obligation for the researchers to apply ethical concerns and to keep those to ask questions carefully, depending on the type of information you're collecting. So if it is too deep, too intimate, then of course you have to apply your or get informed consent from the user or from the subject. These studies are carried out using internet resources. A lot of people are specialized in doing clinical trials and clinical research. So their subjects are pre-identified, their information is pre-collected. So it's normally clinical trials are taken care of according to the guidelines, which has to do with local health departments, national department of health, or whatever you have in US. There is a law that has to do with what is that called, HIPAA law. So there are different laws in different frameworks which actually ensure the not only the anonymity but the privacy, as well as protect some of the sensitive information in clinical and medical trials. So when someone has to start, preparing questionnaire for clinical trials, it is usually done on a private platform, and the subjects are pre-qualified. Everything is signed and consented to before you start this. Web-based experiments are more open. This has a lot of tricky areas where if someone, I don't know if you saw on YouTube, there's a lot of social experiments where, you see a mix of actors that play a role alongside the owners of the premises where where the video is being made. So it is actually predetermined and pre-organized, and consent is obtained ahead of time, except that certain subjects are not supposed to be aware of what is going on, so that a psychological impact or the behavior can be captured. And in that sense, you have to be very much aware of the timings of how, when you are going to obtain that consent. So if you are using an unaware audience for capturing that, then whoever is sitting around or is coming into your video, they should be on board as well. So that is one condition, which is preparing the environment and covering all the legal aspects before the experiment begins. And after the experiment ends, there is another timing issue, which means that you have to obtain a consent from all those subjects that don't know why they have been captured and their behavior. They have to actually consent if they agree to you for using it in your document or in your video that you have created. So web-based experiments are sensitive enough that if it has to do with the social behavior or social experiment or psychology as an example, it needs to be you need to obtain consent from a lot of people in the same subject or in the same area, same premises that are present. It's a lot of paperwork involved. That's all I can tell you. Internet survey advantages: cost effectiveness, of course, automation, real-time access, conserves time and effort, convenience for respondents, design flexibility. What does survey can be programmed even if they are very complex, intricate skip patterns. So the subject in itself of how you create surveys or how you pose those questions is very important. There are people who only specialize in building those questionnaires, and it takes them days and a lot of approval from so many people even before they can talk about defining the subjects or the population or the sample. So this means that you are to be very creative in creating those questionnaires. So the questionnaires should not be threatening. It should not be intrusive. The questions should not be leading someone into believing something which is not true. That means they should not be deceptive, or it should not be misrepresentation. There should be no misinformation. The collection of information has to be time sensitive. The recording, if the recording has to be done, then there is software and third party, as I mentioned to you. Those platforms do the verification of timelines, and your own instruments you're using for capturing that information, like your recorders, any kind of recorders. The XIF file has to be available, which means that the file that says that this was actually the device you have used, this was the timing of capturing this video or these images, whatever there is, that file is captured also and kept as a record. And this is besides and beyond the question that you have created. respondents may be more willing to share personal information because they are not disclosing it directly to another person. There is obviously a situation where you have someone in front of you, and if the questions are of private nature, something you don't want to share with anyone, and you want to answer it either anonymously or answer it on your own without signing, or the name would can be there, but you may not be identified as the subject, which can actually be allowed to even use the false name. You could do that. It's just the way you are going to pose the questions, or the nature of the questions, and the relationship you have with someone you're taking interview from or with. Like with my personal physician, I would be okay to discuss my medical issues, whereas a third party, someone outsider who is just an interviewer, I'd be more concerned about sharing my private medical issues as well. So this is where you could just send out a survey, or call it a survey which does not involve you sitting in front of whoever you're interviewing from or sending out the questionnaire to. So it makes it easy for people, for the time, from the time perspective also, they can answer it at their own will, and they can think about question and not be pressed for time, and there is no physical contact or eye contact, so it makes it easier depending. So these are just some of the types or ways in which the internet services can be advantageous. Um, Internet survey disadvantages: possible cooperation problem, no live interviewer required. So no big deal. What else? So internet information sources is so descriptive. I don't think that we have to worry about this. It tells you different informations you can collect from libraries versus information on the internet. It is explained easily. You could see on this chart, there is an argument that says librarians have these advantages, or this is what they argue. And then there is a counter argument which is favorable for information gathering through the internet. Everything is not in the internet. Sure, confirmed. Internet is not organized. This is what the librarians would tell you. Internet has no quality control. Internet is difficult, and so on. Then on the other hand, there are certain advantages which are listed here. For internet, you can collect, first of all, the information you collect from the internet is timely. It is latest information. It cannot be something that is written in a book, which is old book or old publication, and certain accesses to, ready accesses to the online magazine, or electronic magazines, which are readily available. The major advantage is the searchability, that you can search instantly for information and get it more conveniently. You don't have to browse through the books, or you don't have to be physically there. So these are advantages, disadvantages. Nothing else in this area is important. Besides and beyond this, you would see some charts. Pay attention to the charts because they're concise, and they basically doing a comparison between different sections or different types of headings that are self-explanatory, like what is the difference between search engine, library, and business business standard database. So these are the differences. Charts are there. They would just give you a clarity. You could just browse, just look through them and get quick information. Qualitative, quantitative is described again in this. Who needs the research? Academics, non-academics. And then at the end, what is important is the sources of information, that is defined or explained as the headings are going to tell you, that the sources can be different for different type of information. Like for corporate, business, and industry, it is telling you the type of information which is required, like management report. For management reports, where do we access those information? So examples are given, for private companies, you can go to LexisNexis. For general data, you can go to Open Corporates. That's another website. So website addresses are given. information businesses, what are the type of reports some of the businesses would readily produce or have made already that you can buy from the market. That is another source. Professional association, scientist community, and so on. And as you go down a little bit more, you would have a mention of international organization, international agencies, corporations. Data which is freely available can be considered authentic and can be verified for source and be cited as a relevant and reliable reference. Comes from international agencies, which we normally don't tap into, but that is available also. So this is mentioned, and how international organizations cooperate with each other and exchange certain data and information that otherwise would not be available, just because it is a very extensive work, takes years to collect, a lot of budgets involved. So the big organization or organizations has those information and that is publicly available, except that we don't know about them or where to go and find it. And those links are mentioned here in this chapter. Secondary, primary, we have discussed this. So we're done with this part. I don't think we have done background information, in-depth, quick facts. We've done all this. So let's just look at what is left on the business of research. I'm going to open up the slide. Do you have any questions on business of research? Any one of you? Something that I can answer precisely. We still have about 20 minutes. So we can tackle that subject and I can answer a few questions. How many of you are planning to start your own research business as individuals, as someone who intend to start on their own? How about you, Aaron? Yay or nay? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, good enough. So
I
how
also,
about Nicole and Tammy?
yes, I do plan to look
So,
into it. Yes.
When you're looking at the opportunities, you may want to refer to some of these slides, which we couldn't cover in the webinar we did previously.
Right.
I'm just going to mention what we think as an organization, not that it is a word that's scratched on a stone. It's not something definitive, but we can give you a general idea. And these are the slides that I'm trying to pull out for you. Establish value for your, okay, so I'd rather refer to this chart. Let's open this chart and explain a few things from here, which would actually cover lots of slides. Okay, see this chart right here. As an independent researcher, you can select whether or not you want to become a generalist or you become or you want to do your research as an expert in certain topics or research subjects. If any one of you has a background, a professional background or education background, something that supports your expertise in certain area, um, a specific area of research, then you are going to emphasize or look for market that can use research in that industry or in that area. For example, in the expertise area, it could be online market research. If you are coming from marketing or you have a sales background somewhere, which allows you to be able to capture the pulse of the market, and especially nowadays, e-commerce businesses or products and certain type of services that you feel that you can offer online, then one of them could be market research that you can do for others. Or if you've been involved in as a product manager somewhere, or you are a CTO, chief technology officer somewhere, or been involved in information technology, you can do a lot of market research in that area where you can define competitive products, look at differentiation in functionalities, and do those kind of analysis. Also come up with some research that gathers business intelligence and so on. If you are to do online surveys and polls as an expert, you really need to read a lot more on how to create online surveys and polls. Plus, you should have some connection with others who do these kind of work quite often. And because creating a questionnaire Also requires some industry background sometimes, because it is specialized and geared towards gathering information, certain products that belong to an industry for which you have a lot of experience in. You can present your services, new product launches, clinical research, legal research, company trends, patents, and so on. So these are called expert research. Then comes a place where most of us, or most of the people starting their own research, want to present themselves as generalist. Generalist means that you're open to any kind of research, especially CIRS is really meant for anyone who is to search for all different types of information, or caters for the need of research in any type of industry. So they're more of a generalist in that sense, because we are not specifically training someone to do research in the market intelligence area or legal research. It's more general. Therefore, it places you very well in in the generalist area. One of the examples of a generalist is someone who is offering services as a virtual assistant. Others can be experts in collecting information, like collecting sales leads, which is more common, more prevalent, and something which everybody needs. When you have something common that is an area of research and it is in great demand, usually it becomes very competitive. The price goes down. Usually, what you can bill the client or you can make money out of. The profitability is obviously depending on the competitiveness of that area of research. So keep that in mind. As a generalist, you have a contract, or you work as a contractor. So you're not working for any organization. As a contractor, you have three different platforms where you can present yourself or find these as opportunities. We have three boxes, as you can see. One is the area of information aggregators, or you can label yourself, broadly speaking, not being specific as in the job description or the title of the job. All I'm saying is that this is one area which can define you as a generalist, and that area is that you can say you're going to start as an information gatherer, information aggregator. You can also work as answering questions and research papers collections, and these are just few examples. So it is being a generalist who knows how to gather any kind of information with particular interest in aggregating or collecting research papers for others. Like researchgate.com, for instance, would love to hire you if you have the ability to do query or to query research papers. There are so many out there which are commonly available without any copyrights issue, or maybe they're just there somehow, but they're free and they're easy to collect and for you to define and identify with certain topics. You can do research in that area. You can be answering questions. There are certain websites that are there only to do Q&A. For example, even website that you didn't think that hires a lot of online researchers is Quora, for instance, which is a Q&A site. Generally, it attempts to use crowd wisdom, or it use anyone who becomes their member, register with them and give them ability to answer the questions. But they don't make the bulk of the answers, or most of the questions that are posed inside of it are created or self-created by the organization themselves, and they are being answered by people who are actually on their panel or somehow work as contractors, and they get paid for answering particular questions. Or even they are categorized now, just because Quora has become too big now. I'm just using it as an example. Become so big that they have created different department sections and categories of people who are capable of answering questions, certain specific topics or areas. So that is one area that you can engage with. And you've got outsourcing platform, which means that here you have, and then we have given examples also. See this red arrow pointing down, it's giving an example of some of the websites that use these kind of services that are identified in this box. Then this next box has others which are listed here. That is really a third-party platform, or portals we call them, or specialized websites that work as agents between those who are looking for services that can be outsourced and the ones that are delivering those services. So it is really a platform which really is a connectivity platform between the need and the deliverer, or someone who is going to put the the type of contracts or the type of research they need to get done, and they would just put in a certain type of information which is actually dictated by the website itself, or the rules of the website says that as someone who is looking for or to hire outside help, they would have to not only define the scope of the project, but identify approximate value of the project, or how much they're willing to pay for it, and certain other pieces of information which can be very useful for the uh, others who are offering the services on the other side, you could say, as researchers. So the researchers would choose and select the type of jobs that are out there for which they can offer, or negotiate prices, or, then there is another area of how the communication happens, or um, how the how the client or is going to engage with the research analyst or researcher. So that whole communication and the process which takes place is explained here in these slides as well. Let me see if I can bring it up. So if you want to learn more on how this thing works, let me see if there is a slide here that gives you. Here is the slide. This is giving you an idea of how the process works, and it is pretty much, it's so much easy for you to understand because it has everything explained visually. So it is a good illustration that identifies the type of opportunities that I'm showing in this box right here, which is outsourced platform. Upwork.com, people.hour. These are some of the examples. Then there, the third opportunity box is social networks, advertised, quick hiring, temps, contracts, employment. So I guess you can call this others or other opportunities. One of them is in social networks. Social networks, I would consider social networks as forums, as well as the review sites, and some of the other websites that require an engagement of outside help to create that momentum, or create that dynamics inside of those websites, so that they look like they're busy, and allow for others to be attracted to it and start to participate. So if you are a research analyst, however, you feel that you would be able to offer your services as a generalist, one of the things you could do is go to some websites like Facebook and LinkedIn and look at the jobs and opportunities. You'll be surprised that they're hiring researchers or people who can do quick searches and create that sort of cloud, or you could say that activity, generate that activity that looks healthy, involvement of people that may not truly be outside users, but people who just generate that activity. So just to do that, or answer questions, or participate in a forum, you can even work as someone who understands Google enough that the Google community would get answers from you as someone who's engaged on full-time basis to answer those questions, even though it is considered, or generally the perception is that it is the different people answering, or they're interacting with each other without having any relationship, direct relationship with Google. That is a wrong concept, and it's fundamentally a wrong concept. So you get a lot of opportunities to be hired by them, to work for them on hourly basis, on demand basis, and so on. I'm just giving you some examples just to explain the opportunities of what I mean by social networks. You could be working for a site that is just doing consumer reviews, but you may not be the actually direct consumers, but the beneficiaries eventually are the consumers. However, your engagement could be to generate activity and to answer the questions for that website or on behalf of the vendor or owner of those sites. So you do get paid for that, except that the notion for the users is not for you to be identified as someone who is actually working for that site, but rather to be assumed as someone else answering those questions, or you're giving a non-biased opinion. So this is where the internet plays a role, and the anonymity and the privacy and the all that we talked about fails at this point, because the opinions and some of the things that you assume that are genuinely coming from outsiders or users has nothing to do with those vendors is in fact a wrong concept. It actually works the opposite. Then we've got advertised quick hiring, websites, some of them which I really find that they're actually vandalizing and or basically creating a nuisance factor for the website, includes like indeed.com, simplyhired.com, and those. Just be wary of those, filter them out. Just look for the websites that are actually doing the hiring. They're not just collecting the resumes, because those sites are generally just collecting resumes, and they're creating databases, making you believe that they have posted actual jobs, which is not true. And then they pass on this pieces of information to recruiting companies and so on. Anyway, find the right people who do hiring exactly for the purposes that you are looking for as an opportunity. Sites like Craigslist is more realistic, Angie's List, groups like LinkedIn, Facebook, join the groups, put your or make yourself known, contribute some articles, prove your professional competency there. Just the contribution being there, and for others to follow you and for others to look for you when they actually need someone to hire is more important. And that kind of opportunity you can get by participating in certain groups. I've just mentioned some of them, there could be many more. And then under these two top headings, you could see there is a line and there's another arrow that is pointing down. This is a very valuable, I would say that this is a more important information than anything else, just because it is actually defining in words or giving a name to the type of services that you can offer, or you can put yourself as someone who can offer these services, or put it as a packaging in your websites or whichever marketing means you're using. So some of these that are mentioned here, in fact most of these that are mentioned here, I picked up from other website as a collection of the opportunities which are labeled under these headings. So listen to this one, like leads generation could be one area, data mining is another area, data verifications, website content scraping, contact list collection, product pricing, product selections, business intelligence and analytics, e-commerce products, so on. So all these headings are important just because it will not, these could be a very powerful keywords even for you to look for opportunities, to be very specifically defining where as a generalist you would be able to offer those specific services. So now you have a branding, you have a packaging, you have the names of the type of opportunity. So you can use these as something that you can look for as opportunities, or you can use it for packaging your services, putting it out there so that it matches the opportunities that come elsewhere and others can find you easily. So this is the chart which was more important. Rest of it, I don't think anything else is as important as what we discussed. But one thing is the timeline chart for research project deliverables. I have emphasized even in that webinar, and I do this again, is for you to understand the different processes, different stages of planning your research work, and for you to be able to identify certain documents which are involved in getting those opportunities or settling that contract with your client. With this, I think we pretty much done. Some business softwares are mentioned because you will get all the slides that we have discussed so far. So don't worry if you are thinking that you're missing out something which previously you got as PDFs, and there would be few slides which I've added later as we kept going with our sessions. So I inserted few additional slides. So for you to get the final version of it, give me a day or two. I'll put it together, number them, give them the slide, just make sure I've got everything covered. And then I'm going to send it over to you. So this is my job to do, and I need a couple of days. I'm not sure if I could do it before Christmas, but worst situation, I would do it, I guess 26th, which is a few days after Christmas, 24th, 25th, 26th, 3 days, I won't be available. So anything that I'm not able to finish up prior, will come after 26th. And now that we are done with our all our sessions, I just wanted to thank you all for, first of all, joining this program. And I sincerely hope, and I know that I have given my very best to be able to explain as much as I could in my own broken English, I would say, and not as eloquent, but perhaps you have put up with it, and you must have gained enough knowledge or made it really worthwhile for you to attend this session. And I also hope to see you all next time somewhere in other events that we have. Um, and then, as you know, that we do give 30 days for all of you who has been the participants to communicate with me for asking questions or for assistance you need in passing your CIRS exam. One of the main reasons for creating this course was to enable you to pass the exam. And that is something which is not really like totally in my control. However, I have given you sample practice exams, all 4 modules that are out there for you to work on. And Tammy has been consistently using that facility, and she's been, when she was comfortable enough, she went ahead for final exams, and she did pass the 2 modules already, and she has 2 more to go, which I'm pretty sure she'll be able to do. Or if in case you feel that you need to go for CIRS, I'm available to assist you in any way I can, and try your best to actually accomplish that achievement. And if you do that, there are more opportunities, and Melanie has explained it to you as well, that there could be opportunities for you to teach these courses and to take further the learning or the program for us. So that opportunity is always going to be there. In the meantime, I don't want to take too much of your time today. It was the last class. I thoroughly enjoyed teaching you, and thank you so much for your participation again. Wish you all the best. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and make best of your holidays, and stay safe.
Same to
Okay.
you, everyone.
All
Thank
right.
you. Same to
Thank
you.
you very much. Thank you very much, all of you. It was great having you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.